Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 226. On this episode of the podcast, Jen interviews Scott Miller on how to model work-life balance. I've got this one called, I'm unemployed and I have no life. Perfect balance.
You're listening to the Careers by Jen podcast with me, Jen Swanson, the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. My guest today says that work-life balance is a secret we don't actually mean. And so I begin our conversation by asking him what he's talking about with that question, with that statement. And I'm sure you'll enjoy his answer. Scott Miller is the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership for the global organizational improvement firm FranklinCovey. He's the author of a book called Management Mess to Leadership Success, 30 Challenges to Become the Leader You Would Follow. And he's a radio host and a podcast host as well. He's got a podcast called On Leadership with Scott Miller, and he's got a radio program called Great Life, Great Career with Scott Miller. And so he was the perfect person to have on the show to talk about this idea of work-life balance. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So Scott Miller, I'm going to start by asking you a question. In your book, you've got a challenge about work-life balance, and you call work-life balance a secret that we don't mean. And I'm wondering if you can tell us more about that.
Well, sure. I think it's a bit of a myth, right? And I think everybody has a different level of balance. You know, in the free market economy, which is, very much the case in the Western Hemisphere, we tend to work a lot more than a lot of our companions in Europe and even, in some of the other continents. We're kind of more like Asia that way, where we place a strong emphasis, for good or bad, Jen, on how much we work. I think we talk a lot as leaders and organizations around, work-life balance, but in for-profit companies, at least, there's a strong push for still a focus on face time and, how much time you're in the office or that you appear to be working. I think that's lessening. But I think as leaders, which I'm one and you're one, we have got to be very mindful of what we model. That if we really, really genuinely mean that people need to have greater balance in their lives, and that might mean different things to different people, we have to model it ourselves. We have to encourage it. We have to be interested. We have to ask about it. We have to give permission people to actually take vacation and to not work around the clock and get burnt out. So I think there's so many ways that leaders can change the culture and change that myth and really mean it. I think too often a lot of these high-performing organizations have high-performing CEOs. That's great. Everyone wants to invest in a high-performing company. But I think there's been a disservice in a lot of organizations where you have these high-performing CEOs. They're often extreme athletes. They're often extreme at everything, and they pride themselves on, 3 hours of sleep a night and on and on and on. And it creates a culture, it creates a standard. It creates an unsustainable model that people don't want to live up to. So they kind of try and they burn out or they fake it or they quit. So I think there just needs to be kind of a wholesale reckoning of what do we mean by work-life balance as leaders? Are we serious about it? Why are we serious? And how do we model it and really lead to that?
And I spoke on a podcast, I think it was a couple of years ago now, with a woman who wrote a book called Work-Life Balance is Dead. And I love the title. And her point was that it's really more about taking on a life philosophy than actually being able to achieve a balance in what you do, especially now because we're connected 24/7.
Yeah, I might agree and disagree with some of those thoughts. I'm sure if I haven't read her book, so I can appreciate all of her perspective. Here's what I would say. Here's what I've learned. I'm a executive officer at the FranklinCovey company. We teach this for a living, right? So I should be somewhat adept at it, although I'm probably struggling with it as much as everybody. I think people have to define for themselves, what do they want out of their life, right? Can they uncover their mission? Can they design their purpose? Have they identified their values? Can they bring congruency with their decisions, how they spend their time, their money, their effort with what is important to them? So I think, creating the right balance for yourself is what it's about. It might be misnamed. Work-life balance might just be, what do you want to accomplish in your life? Because not everybody may not want a perfect balance between work and life. There are seasons in our life. I write about this in the book, Management Mess to Leadership Success. I write about how important it is to understand there might be seasons when you're out of balance, and that's okay. There might be seasons in your life when you have, the perfect balance. I think the idea, though, is seasons come and seasons go. So the first question I'd be asking everyone is, what is it you want out of your life? Maybe you don't want a perfect balance of work and play or of renewal. We all have different, seasons that we're kind of ebbing and flowing in. I mean, I'm 51. I have a 4-year-old, Jen. I have a 6-year-old. I have an 8-year-old. Save me. And these are wonderful boys. But there's no balance, right? I mean, I have a high-performing corporate career. I just celebrated my 10th anniversary with my wife. I have 3 boys. I volunteer at my church. I write books and I speak and I host podcasts and a radio program, and it's on and on. Do I have balance? I don't know. I have fulfillment. I'm probably out of some balance, but I think people have to really look inside themselves and say, what's my purpose? And am I able to organize my time and my attention and my decisions around accomplishing what's important to me? And then you'll decide what the right balance is.
I resonate with a lot of what you just said. Plus, I'm exactly the same age as you are. So there you go.
Well, you sound younger.
Well, thanks. My kids are older, but there are seasons, as you say. And I really think this idea of balance in general is subjective. So when we're talking about modeling it for someone else, especially if you're in a leadership role in your work, what would that look like? Because what you might consider to be, the right balance or the right, distribution of your activities throughout the day for yourself may look very different to someone you're working with.
That's exactly right. I have a couple of pointed thoughts on this. One is, sit down with your team if you're a leader and have an engaging conversation where you're listening and you're talking. And perhaps you say to them, you know what, I'd like to know, perhaps it's one-on-one. It might be better in your culture to have it one-on-one. This is to say, let's talk about the kind of culture we want in our team. First, we're employed. We're here to produce an outcome for our clients, for our customers, to our shareholders, to each other, right? So we're here to do a job. And so first, be very clear on what is it going to take to get your contribution right, to do the job, to serve our mission, our purpose. Second, what is it going to take for you to feel fulfilled in your role? That might be different from lots of people. Some people are single. Some people are widowed. Some people are going through different parts of their life, and they might be in a season where working more is good for them. Some people get great enjoyment out of their avocation, being their vocation. Not everybody. So I would sit people down and say, you know what? Here's what I'm like. And as the leader, just declare, you know what? I like to work. I take validation out of it. It gives me fulfillment. It gives me purpose. It's sometimes an escape from my other demands of my life. Whatever it is, just be transparent. I think vulnerability as a leader, Jen, is such an important leadership competency. Just share your own insecurities, share your own concerns. You have to lead, so you have to model. But I think being the light, not the judge, being the model, not the critic, is such an important role. Make it safe for people to talk about what's the right balance for them. And then ask people, what do you want out of your career and your life, and how can I help you get there? Now, again, we got to put in whatever work it takes. If you can do the work in 40 hours a week, then, great. If you can do it in 30, we probably have to wonder, are you, properly allocated your share? I don't mean to prescribe a number, but I think there's some refreshment in just sitting down and talking to your people and having an open dialogue around what does balance mean for them. Some people might like to work a 4-day work week. Some like to work a 6-day work week. Some like to work from home. Now, different cultures tolerate and can subscribe to different, flexibilities. Some people that are virtual members of our team, they tend to work more. We may think they work less because they're out of sight, out of mind, but we all know this idea of working from home does not mean you work less. It means you have a harder job of differentiating your work life from your personal life. So I think it rests with the leader to model what they want to see in others, and to also say, what, if I'm here at 6 a.m, that does not mean that you need to be here at 6 a.m. You might need to be here at 8 or 7:30 and work till 5:30, 6, whatever the norm is. But great leaders understand their responsibility may not be the other person's responsibility, but you have an open dialogue. And also, if you think someone is abusing it, that they're not adding to their share, then you have to summon the courage, sit them down and say, listen, I need to have a high courage conversation to talk straight because we're getting a bit off track. That's a leader's job, is to make sure that everybody kind of understands, are they calibrated properly? Not to the point of micromanagement, but for, a good ebb and flow.
And if you notice someone in your team who is working through their breaks at their desk and not taking their full break for lunch and staying late and coming in early, that would be something to take a look at as well.
I think so. It's a great insight, Jen, because I think, again, back to the leader being able to have high courage conversations, move outside their comfort zone, discuss the undiscussables, perhaps sit down with a person and say, hey, I noticed you've been working really hard lately. You've been coming in early, staying late, working through your lunch breaks. I want to acknowledge your extraordinary contribution. And I don't want to diminish that. At the same time, I want to ask you, is something going on that you're choosing to spend more time at work than in the rest of your life? Do you feel like you have an imbalance in your workload? Because what I don't want you to do is to burn out. And I don't want you to fall into a trap that I've fallen into, which is sometimes I become a bit of a victim, or I become a martyr because I'm working so hard and I see others who may not at the surface appear to be putting in the same amount of effort. Now, I don't attempt to accuse you of any of those things, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page, that you're choosing to put this in and you're not feeling extraordinarily burdened or that you do burn out. Because if you're like me, I can find myself resenting that I choose to work perhaps at the surface harder than others. And then I become resentful when they take vacation or they leave early. And I just want to make sure that you're not falling into that trap, or whatever version of that conversation works for your culture, your team, or the person. I think there's many ways to have that conversation to make sure the person knows they can talk to you. They can be honest around, maybe they're having difficulty in their marriage. Maybe there's a personal challenge that they're trying to avoid. That's okay. Work's a safe place. For some of us, work is a refuge. And that doesn't mean you should shame them or that you should, ascribe a value to that. Just be there to be their leader. And in some cases to know that it's okay. They're respected. They can talk to you about what's going on appropriately.
So I'm going to ask you, we're going to take a break for a second, but when I come back, I want to ask you, other than having conversations with people one-to-one or in the team, what other things you can do to model that work-life balance. So we'll be right back.
Are you procrastinating? Do you want to start a job search but aren't quite sure where to begin? Is it all just a little overwhelming? At Careers by Jen, we have a 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge to help you get unstuck and move toward finding your dream job. Every day for 5 days, you'll receive an email to your inbox that asks you to complete one task. Every task you complete moves you closer toward your goal. The best part about this challenge is that it's absolutely free. Come over to careersbyjen.com and you'll see the 5-day Jumpstart Your Job Search Challenge on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on the image of Jen, sign up with your email address, and you'll be 5 days closer to reaching your goal. Why wait when you can get busy? Visit careersbyjen.com after this podcast.
So I'm here with Scott Miller, and we're talking about modeling work-life balance. So what other things can you do other than just having the one-to-one conversation?
Yeah, I think the leader sets the culture for any organization. And I think it's immeasurably important for leaders to know that you are the linchpin for the culture. You set culture in everything you do and say, and what you don't do, what you don't say. People will watch, how you text, how you email, the types of meetings you're involved in, how long the meetings go. So as a leader, I just want you to be mindful that everything you do sets culture. And generally in most cultures, what the boss wants, what people do. What the boss does or says, what gets done. So if you want people to have a balanced life, whatever that means, it might be balanced professional development. It might be interests outside the workplace. It might be just a healthy culture where people aren't working 80 hours a week because they're going to burn out. It's just, I think it's a fact over time. So as a leader, I would just be deliberate and intentional on the type of culture you want to lead, because you'll build a culture either deliberately or accidentally. So I would just be mindful of what you are modeling. If it is important for you to take a vacation because you value that for the renewal, for the break from the office, then make sure you take a vacation, announce it. Because even if the boss doesn't take a vacation, people need a vacation from you. They need you to leave for 4 days or a week. They need a break from you. They do. And that's not a horrifying thought, because sometimes the real work gets done when the boss is away. And if you, as a boss, if you can't afford to take a vacation, or you're not, full of a lot of friends, we all have seasons in our life, and go home and mow the lawn, or, draw the shades and clip a bonsai tree. But you need to make it safe for other people to have interests outside work, because then we all become one-dimensional and we don't bring our best creativity and our renewed spirit to the job. So I just want to reiterate, Jim, that leaders create the culture, and people will do what you value and what you say is important. And don't underestimate the impact that your actions have on setting the standard. And by the way, I think the best cultures are where you sit around as a team and you talk about, what kind of culture do we want? Well, we want one where we love our jobs and we're customer focused and we respect each other and we don't gossip, where we have a culture where we're not demonized if we take our full vacation pay, as long as our work gets done. We want the kind of culture where vacation is vacation and we use that as sort of sacred, and we don't call or text unless the building's burning. Whatever it is, you have the power to create that within your team, but the leader has to take control.
So if you're not a leader, you're not the big leader, you're not the big boss, you're maybe in middle management, or maybe you're an employee. Is there a way to model this balance for your colleagues?
Yeah, I think everybody has some leadership influence in them. I think, again, it's important to make sure the leader is involved. But I think, it's okay to announce that, I really need to bring some balance to my life. And I want to go to yoga every night at 6:00. So I have to leave the office at 5:30, and make sure your work is done. Make sure you're not delusional about your contribution. I think great employees who manage their career, who take control of their career, are never surprised about what the boss thinks about them, that you are always seeking feedback. You can handle a tough conversation, that you're not delusional around your contribution. And if you work in a culture that, quite frankly, doesn't value, Jen, the kind of balance you want, it may be time to, look somewhere else. Because people who live in cultures that are unbalanced, they will find a culture that is balanced and they'll quit. We know people quit their bosses, not their jobs, right? We know people quit their cultures, not their jobs. So I think if you focus on what Dr. Covey would say is your circle of influence, the things you can control versus the things you can't control, your circle of concern, you'll see your influence grow.
And I think the health of the organization will show itself with how many people are booking off sick or stressed or are away stressed, or how many people are leaving, and the turnover. And that might be a strong indication of something that isn't honoring that self-care and that balance.
Yeah, in fact, at that point, Jen, I think organizations are shifting to an enormous emotional intelligence, if you will, around understanding burnout is a real thing. People do want a life outside of work. Your job is your career. Your career is not your life. And I would just encourage your listeners it doesn't mean that you have to compartmentalize your work from your life, right? A lot of us now, to your quote earlier from your other interview, there's this blurring back and forth between our work and our life. That's not going away, right? Asia's not shutting down. Americans and Canadians still need to work with the Middle East and South America and vice versa, right? Increasingly, we're going to have our work lives and our personal lives blending together. I think organizations realize that. What you're seeing, even at FranklinCovey, which is, a 40-year-old company, but we're not the most progressive firm in the world. We have a great, strong, ethical culture, but we're still coming on board in terms of understanding, flex time and flex vacation time and kind of, take what you need, but get your job done. And I think there's a palpable shift, at least in the Western hemisphere, about organizations realizing if you want to attract and retain top talent, you've got to provide a flexible, nurturing culture. And to that point, if I could mention one more thing, I talked about retaining talent. I think it's a leader's number one job. Before anything else, before like shareholder value or, even your customer, you've got to build a culture where people choose to stay, where they choose to resist the recruiter's call, because we know they're coming in every hour right now with unemployment in the US at least super low. I think it's very healthy in Canada right now as well.
It is.
Everybody's getting poached.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So as a leader, I want you to think about your number one job is not just to recruit, but to retain talent, especially that of your high performers. Because if they're being asked to contribute an extraordinary amount week after week, quarter after quarter, they're going to take the recruiter's call. And in some cases, people will leave for less pay. They'll leave for the same pay because they've got an employer who they think appreciates them more and values what they value. So it's a lot of burden to put on leaders, but it is the number one job, I think, is to do not rest on your laurels and recognize that your people are being recruited nonstop. You don't know about it, and you've got to constantly be re-engaging them. And it might be making sure they know they're appreciated. They know they're valued. Don't assume they know. Walk up, check your ego, and tell them how much you appreciate them, and tell them that you want to make sure that they have a work environment they love to come to, and that there's some things you can do to create better balance in their life or more fulfillment. That's part of your job. I do think it's part of a leader's job.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm passionate about that, Jen. I got carried away.
No, it's quite fine. The whole culture of the workplace, as you say, seems to be shifting. I mean, when you're trying to change culture, it's slow. So there are many places that are not having flexible work days and allowing people to work, telecommute and all of that. And there are some jobs that you just can't do that in.
Right, that's right.
But it's interesting that it is a time right now, especially where we are in North America, where there are a lot of jobs out there, as you say, and there's also this shift in from the employee perspective. I want to be doing something that's meaningful. I want to be in a workplace that's life-giving, not life-draining. I want to be feel useful and purposeful. And if I'm not getting it, there's 3 other places I can go to get that today. Yeah,
that's exactly right. Right, for more money.
Yeah.
And I don't know that money is the chief currency anymore, right? I mean, I could go somewhere else and earn more money than FranklinCovey, a lot more. And money is a big motivator for me. I got 3 kids to feed, right? So but I choose to stay because I am validated and I am valued. Not all is perfect at FranklinCovey. We're a group of humans. Of course, it's not perfect.
Right.
But I will tell you, I think we do a good job of really trying to re-engage our employees. On the executive team, we talk monthly about, are we re-recruiting the people that we think are in jeopardy of being poached out? Because everybody comes to FranklinCovey because we produce great people, right, with our clients and with our employees. So we're very mindful of that. I will tell you, I mentioned earlier, Jen, in our company, we're not the most progressive, but I don't know who's on vacation, who's not. I don't keep track of that. I wouldn't begin to know if someone's on their 10th day or their 20th day, because we've built a culture of mature, responsible, self-directed people. Everybody has to be course corrected. Everybody has blind spots, but we build a culture where people are empowered to, take the time they need. And nobody working for me is underproducing, not even a stretch. Now, that's not the case everywhere, right? There are institutions and organizations that are older, but as a leader, I still think you can create that culture on your own team. You can't violate your company policies, but I think you can be a progressive leader in your own team, even if it's a team of 3, to make sure that your culture is the one that you want people to be choosing to stay in.
Well, and the ability to have that that personal accountability is so important, rather than having somebody breathing down your neck, micromanaging and watching every move that you make and keeping track of it in a scorecard.
Quit that job tonight. Quit that job tonight, right?
But there still
By
are
the way,
some...
I've been that boss. I've been that boss. I wrote about it in my book.
Yeah. And that there are still places like that. And it's so destructive and so soul sucking, I think.
I also think those places will be eliminated day by day. Even if, for those of us who might think, well, those might be, government organizations or not-for-profits that aren't as competitive and nimble. I think some of the best places to work in North America are these government organizations, because they realize if they want to recruit talent from the private sector, they've got to be competitive. They've got to have a culture. I think some of the most innovative leaders in North America are working outside the private sector, because they've got to create a culture that is appealing to sometimes offset what might be not always a competitive salary.
Yeah, the factory job is dying. And I don't mean the factories literally. I mean that kind of workplace culture. So Scott, you're very passionate about this. I want to know, how did you get into doing what you do?
Well, let's see. I was born and raised in Central Florida back in the early 70s. I took a job with the Disney Development Company, which was a real estate arm of the Walt Disney Company. I was young and talented and a jerk, and they invited me to leave because I was not aligned with their culture. And I had a fairly humbling experience. I learned a ton. I'm a huge fan of the Disney culture. And at that point, I was spotted by what was then the Covey Leadership Center, which was Stephen Covey's consulting company. And they took a bet on me 23 years ago. So here I was, a single Catholic boy from Orlando, moving out to Provo, Utah in the 90s. And that was a big cultural change. And if you've been to Utah, you know what I mean. And I've had an amazing run. Lots of sort of one step forward, two step back in my career. I think I'm a high performer. I don't think I'm a natural leader of people. I think leading people requires a fundamentally different skill set than it does to be the top salesperson or the best digital designer or the most proficient nurse. So I've learned a lot about leadership. I've lived in London, Chicago, and Utah for the company. It's been an amazing ride. I tutored Dr. Covey, whose book now, The 7 Habits, has sold, can you believe, Jen, 30 million copies?
Oh, I believe it.
And this is the 30th year. I became their chief marketing officer. And then recently I moved out of that daily operations role into what we call the executive vice president of thought leadership. So I'm hosting podcasts like you. I host a radio program. I'm writing some books. I just wrote my first book, which is, I'm delighted to announce, is now in its 6th week as the #1 new release on Amazon. And it's basically a confession of all of my leadership challenges. I wanted to write a very vulnerable book to say, you know what, leadership isn't for everybody. It's tough. It's not as nice as everybody says it is. It's not all about mission and vision and values. That's important. It's sometimes about, you know what, having tough conversations and about, saying no to things and what to say yes to. So I've had an amazing journey. I plan to write some more books, and I hope to always be somehow associated with FranklinCovey, because I'm a big fan of our leadership and of our clients and of the work that we do.
That's great. And if people want to know more about where to find you, where can they go?
Thanks for asking. So the book that I've authored for FranklinCovey is called Management Mess to Leadership Success. And you can visit managementmess.com. You can connect to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube from that. You also can visit franklincovey.com, and you can find all the podcasts and newsletters that I host there. I'm kind of hard not to find these days, to my wife's annoyance.
That's great. And do you have a last piece of advice for the Careers by Jen listener?
Yeah, I might share. I think generally speaking, people try to harvest their careers too soon. In one of Dr. Covey's original 7 Habits of Highly Effective People programs, he interviewed a potato farmer from Idaho. And it's one of the most amazing professional development videos I've ever watched. You probably could Google it. It's called The Law of the Harvest. So for your listeners, Google The Law of the Harvest. It's a couple of minute video that the FranklinCovey company produced. And basically this Idaho potato farmer in this interview talks about the law of the harvest, right? Mother Nature. And in it, he says something prophetic. He says, every couple of years, we have to plant a money-losing crop. I think he says it's alfalfa. And we lose money on it. But the nutrients that puts back into the soil that year, the soil we've stripped with the previous year's potatoes, allows us to build, bigger, richer, more expensive, better tasting potatoes the next year. And I think there's such a great career metaphor. I think, Jen, too often in people's careers, they try to harvest too soon. I would encourage everybody, be patient, plant, fertilize, weed, water, fertilize some, some more. Make sure that you've earned the right to move up in your organization. Doesn't mean become complacent by any means, right? Ask for a raise, ask for a new promotion when the time is right. I'm a fairly impulsive, you can tell, and impetuous person. And I think one of the things that I've learned is to slow down a bit, earn the right to move forward. Doesn't mean don't be entrepreneurial. You got to ask for a promotion. Just be sure you're ready for it. You've earned it. In almost every organization, people are thinking about you. They're thinking about you in the pipeline of moving up and being promoted. You're not invisible. If you are, you're working in the wrong company. I mean, our leadership team, we're always scanning for who's next, right? Maybe not as fast as they want us to, because we don't want to make a misstep, because putting somebody in the right role is as worse for you as it is for them, or worse so. So with people, Google the video, The Law of the Harvest, and think about the metaphors of, is it time for you to plant or is it time for you to harvest?
I love that. I have to ask, my son and I just had a conversation about something similar recently, and he's working his way up in the film industry, which is really hot up here. And he says he figures he'll be in the position he wants to be in about 10 years. And apparently you can buy your way in faster if you purchase a particular type of equipment. But his statement was, but then I won't have earned my dues and I won't have put in my time. And there's a respect thing there that is different. And so he's well aware that he doesn't want to harvest before it's time. And I thought, wow, that sounds exactly what he's up to. So I'm glad to hear this.
And Jen, my advice isn't to say that you should, just subjugate your career, turn it over to the organization and follow their process. I don't mean that at all.
No,
I've always been very deliberate around my own career, right? I mean, I decide how long I'll be in this job, at least metaphorically. What I do mean is there is a great EQ, an emotional intelligence that I think everybody needs to be more deliberate around. Are you killing the job you have? Are your results speaking for themselves? Do people know your results without you grandstanding or stealing credit from somebody else? Are you pushing the window, but are you pushing it too fast? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean for people to slow down exaggeratively. Just be really thoughtful. Maybe have a conversation with your boss. Hey, how am I doing? Am I in line for a promotion? Is it too soon? Just, most bosses will respect that conversation. But I think the law of the harvest not just applies to our careers. It applies to our marriages. It applies to our kids, our relationships. In most things in life, slower is better than faster. It's certainly true when it comes to relationships.
Right. Wow. Well, I'm going to Google that as soon as we are done with this.
I'm delighted.
Thank you, Scott Miller.
No, it's important.
It is.
There's about a 20-second clip in the middle. So look for it and make sure you don't miss it when he talks about the money-losing crop. That's the key piece of the video.
Okay, will do. All right. Well, Scott, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here today.
My honor. Thanks for the invitation.
You've been listening to Careers by Jen with Jen Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.